If you're an adult watching this and you're thinking to yourself, I might be autistic, so how was this missed? Well, that question actually makes a lot of sense because a lot of late identified adults aren't confused because they're overthinking what they may or may not have. Rather, they weren't given the language to fully understand what's been there the entire time. So today I'm going to go into 4 reasons why it gets overlooked or missed, what I typically see when adults show up for an evaluation, and how I try to help them sort it out so they can get the answers that they need. So if you're new here, I'm Dr. James Thatcher. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist at Forest Psychological Clinic in Portland, Oregon. And I work with kids, teens, adults, across the lifespan on this particular issue. And I love working with kids and teens, but I have done a lot, and I mean a lot, of these evaluations with adults. And what I typically hear is, how come nobody caught this? Let's get into it. So one of the biggest reasons that I see that adults often get missed is because of masking and compensating. A lot of the folks that I work with will often, kind of say themselves in one form or the other, if I study people closely, if I script, if I mirror what they're doing and what they're saying, I'll be able to just get by. And here's the painful part that I hear a lot, is that adults, they know. They know internally that they are missing something that everybody else seems to have. They'll describe it like, everybody else got this manual, but I didn't. And that's noticing something real, right? This lifelong mismatch of wanting connection, of wanting to do things right, but instinctively just not having access to the unwritten rules. And the cost of compensating always shows up, right? Comes up as burnout, anxiety, sometimes depression. I see that quite a bit. Constant self-criticism, or even needing a lot of downtime in order to recover after social situations. The second reason it gets missed is stereotypes. A lot of what people took in about autism was a very narrow range of what it actually is. Growing up, I remember a lot of people thinking that autism was akin to what Dustin Hoffman played in Rain Man. And that's not true. That is not everyone that has autism. And then there's another myth that I hear about autism, and I still hear this one, is they can't be autistic. They're too smart. No, that's not true. Rather, in fact, a lot of folks that would be classified as, more mild, level 1 autism, they have average to above average to extremely high intelligence. So you can be highly intelligent, very verbal, extremely successful on paper and in life, and still have autism. And here's what people often miss, to where you may have competence in one area, but that doesn't mean that you have competence in all other areas. So let me give you an example. Someone might be extremely smart cognitively, but they can struggle socially or adaptively. And what do I mean by adaptively? I'm talking about self-care abilities, self-direction, being able to take care of yourself, engage in daily routines, be able to regulate your emotions, staying organized enough in order to take care of daily responsibilities. So you can be extremely intelligent and still feel that daily life is very hard. The third reason I see that it gets missed is we didn't have the language. I'm in my 40s, and I remember when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, even young adult, we really just didn't have the language that we do today to be able to talk about neurodivergency to where it's a normal part of life. And I grew up in the Midwest in the 90s, and the vibe back then was, if you're struggling, you keep it to yourself. People didn't say, at least not from my recollection, words like burnout or shutdown. Rather, what they said was, that person's having a nervous breakdown. And with that connotation that went along with it was a lot of shame. They're not able to handle their stuff. And the thing is, the 90s was not that long ago. And that viewpoint, that's shaped a lot of families. And the fourth reason that I see is the overlap between ADHD and autism, or what people are now being able to call AuDHD. And a lot of people got missed because of that. Up until 2013, the DSM basically said if you had ADHD, you could not have autism, or if you had autism, you could not have ADHD. So there was a lot of folks that was identified in the 90s, early 2000s that had ADHD, but because they were given that diagnosis, the exploration, if they had autism, just stopped at that point. And only now, in more recent years, now that there's more research coming out, are we understanding that these two conditions are very much co-occurring with one another. So what do I typically see when adults finally start asking themselves, hey, I might be on the spectrum, or I think I might have been missed? Like, what do I typically see when the adult comes to my office? Well, I see a lot of burnout. I see a lot of struggling at work. I see a lot of adults, quitting, or that they've quit multiple jobs over the years. I see a lot of sleep issues, relationship conflicts, intense self-criticism, or even social hangovers, needing a lot of time in order to recover after a social situation. An interesting pattern that I see, and this is just anecdotal, what I personally see is when I work with adults that have a partner that's very accepting, who gives them the permission to just kind of be themselves and enough space so that they can fully recover, well, their adaptive behaviors tend to be better, right? So how do we sort it all out? A lot of the times I get adults come in and they don't know what's going on. They are wondering, could this be autism? Could it be trauma? Could it be OCD? Could it be social anxiety? Could it be ADHD? And in reality, it could be all of those things, or it could be a couple of those things, or none of those things. So how do we sort all of that out? So the simplest way that I can put it is that autism is neurodevelopmental, meaning that it's been there their entire life. Ever since they were an infant, there would have been signs of autism at that point in their life. So how do I suss that out? Well, I got to get collateral information, right? I got to use folks that knew the person when they were younger. So that could be a parent. Maybe that's an older sibling. Maybe that's not possible. Maybe they passed away or they're estranged. So then, as long as that person can be an accurate historian of when they were in junior high, high school, I also encourage them to bring in different, photographs or journals or family videos, just anything and everything to kind of help me look at and help them look at what was going on when they were little. So what I'm going for is I'm looking at the long arc. I'm looking at history. And then what else do I look for? That's not the only thing I look for. The other thing I look for is the driver. What's behind this? What's behind these symptoms? What's causing these things? Let me give you an example. So autism versus OCD. OCD is typically obsessive thoughts and compulsions in order to reduce anxiety. Whereas autistic rigidity can often look like this is the routine, these are the rules, this is how I like things to be done. And when things aren't done that way, it can be deeply uncomfortable, but it's not driven by an intrusive fear loop. So if this video is landing for you, here's the hopeful part. So where even having the language for these things, being able to identify it, can shift your thinking from there's something wrong with me or I must be broken to no, this is how my brain works. And what could help is a neuroaffirming therapist, because they're going to be able to meet you where you're at. They're going to be able to see you through this lens first. They can work with you on anxiety and depression, but being able to see you through the lens of neurodiversity first is far more effective because they're able to meet you at where your capacity is. They're able to understand the sensory needs that you have. They're able to work on a tailored plan on any social difficulties that you have and modulate that plan as life, inevitably comes up and things need to change. And if you're interested in more, please stick around for my next video on basically what to do after you get this diagnosis. Because getting a diagnosis isn't the finish line, it's a roadmap on how to move forward.